Recording in progress. Welcome everyone to another awesome live edition. Really stoked to be doing these live now with our guest artists, and we have an artist coming in from a place that has internet and power. Surprisingly, I wouldn't have taken it as a given. We have Whitney Johnson, aka
Yeah. Yep.
Matches. Here coming in live from where? Well, tell us, where are you calling from, Whitney?
Yeah. So I am in a barn, a converted barn. It feels like a cabin that's close to the city Uppsala in Sweden, which is about an hour north of Stockholm. But the very small town is called Österbro. And I think Enköping is like a close town I haven't been to yet. That's kind of it's a town. Uppsala is about a half hour away. And that's like a small city, fourth biggest city in Sweden.
What's the temp like? Average temp right now?
It's not that bad. So it's actually a lot colder in Chicago, where I
Oh,
actually live usually.
okay. Well, there you
Well,
go.
that's yeah, it's kind of wild. It just snowed last night, and I think in Fahrenheit it's like right around freezing, or it's in maybe like the high 20s right now.
Yeah, not too
Um,
horrible.
yeah, yeah, it's cold, but it's not too bad.
Considering you're pretty close to the North Pole compared to Chicago, that would be, I guess, one would think it would be colder there. But I'm
Yeah.
sure it looks absolutely stunning from the few images I saw on your IG so far. It
Mhm.
looks absolutely, it looks metal as fuck, is what it looks like.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I know you
Yeah.
told me before we came on live here, you were telling me what you're actually doing out there. But before we get into all this musical jib jab that we're going to be talking about, sonic verbiage, can you tell us a little bit about what brings you out to rural Sweden?
Yeah. So I'm doing some postdoctoral research at the Center for Gender Research at Uppsala University. And the project is on gender and sound and technology and the way that we like embody gender and the way that kind of maybe our identities are like suited to different technological apparatus like this one. It's mostly about like video calls and video conferencing is like what I'm studying
Hmm.
versus in person. And so I'm talking to like sound artists, trans and non-binary and intersex sound artists is the proposal. I haven't done it yet to talk about how like streaming concerts and videos are different from shows where it's a bunch of people in the same room.
Right, right. Like the yin and yang double-edged sword of like it's democratized, people feel safe attending things virtually, but like
Mhm.
what's the give and take of like removing the physical community side of it? It's kind of like doing this, online music school learning community we got going on here versus like I don't know, a classroom or a brick and mortar or something like that. That's
Yeah.
fascinating. So are you in a before we get into the Match S project itself, would you mind telling us just a little bit background, I guess both musically and academically, like where you're coming from, maybe where that intersects? Because I mean, we're talking, you mentioned sound here. I don't know if that's the formal, if you're a postdoc, what the formal PhD was in. I don't know if you mind telling us a little bit about that, but also just musical and art background in general.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I feel like they were very different lives for me for like most of my life
Interesting.
until kind of recently, where I've kind of started to bring them together a little bit more.
Hmm.
So like my dissertation and my PhD research was in sociology of sound and perception. And so I
Ah.
was like studying phenomenology and how we perceive sound and also how we value sound in different contexts.
Hmm.
So I was like comparing experimental music and other kinds of concert music to sound art and things that happen in like galleries and museums and how things are differently valued, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a
different
big
aesthetic
difference there.
principles. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
absolutely.
but it's so it's if one was to put this in the macro umbrella, sound studies through a
Mhm.
sociological lens is really the angle here, right? Because people sound studies or sound scholars rather, that you can find them in music just as much as you can find them in cochlear, audiology
Mhm.
type stuff, finding these types of scholars. But that's fascinating though. So what brings, I guess, the postdoc is this? Did you feel like a yearning to push forward with this specific project? Like there was a need to for there to be documentation and research in the the COVID age now? Did it bring it out of you?
Yeah, I feel like that's a big part of it. The way that all of our, or many of our lives have changed in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the like theories of listening and hearing that we have are about being in physical space with sound vibration.
Yeah.
And it works just differently when it's about like headphones and computer speakers, and often without others in the same room. And so some of our social ideas about sound are pretty different when it's like this, I guess.
Right, right. And also with now like the development of like ambisonic, 3D, VR related audio projects
Mhm.
and things, where the goal, at least from like the Mark Zuckerberg perspective, is to like replace the office with, I guess Microsoft is doing it too, with like, 3D audio so you could hear your boss where they're behind you breathing over your neck virtually.
Mhm.
Your boss's avatar or whatever.
Yeah.
It's there's that again, the double-edged sword, right? Like
Mhm.
technology used for good and for evil, right? Technology can be
Mhm.
is neutral in that way. Tell me about
Yeah.
yourself musically. I guess you said out of the academic context, it's been a sort of separate thing up until more recently.
Mhm.
What was that like up until more recently then?
Yeah. So I started like singing and being, attuned to the musical world as a tiny child. I would say
Yeah.
that's where it all starts. But yeah, I like studied piano a little bit and then I started on viola. That's my main instrument. And so I was like in viola, kind of classical, like, playing in orchestra and doing private lessons and stuff like that when I was a kid, and then went to music school and then kind of got into more avant-garde composition stuff while I was there, and then got out and then was playing like rock music, was playing, and improvised music and all kinds of stuff during like those post college years, I guess.
Right.
And then, yeah, I think Matches began in like 2009. So it's actually been a while, but I'm old. So, it was already far into my life when I started like composing my own music, I guess.
Interesting. So this was your first official like public solo project, but having been in different bands and things in the post college period, were you like fully sociology MA and PhD candidate as Matches was like, you know, coming to fruition, or was that kind of like still separate points or simultaneous points?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I guess they started about the same time.
Mm,
I probably started this music in like 2009,
yeah.
and I think I started my PhD in 2010. So it was kind of, two starting two new chapters of life, I guess.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But obviously, I guess, at least the non-music research work will inform, listening listening in all regards, right? So that includes your own musical work, but it's fascinating to have this separation of you know, business and pleasure when it comes to sound in some way, right?
Yeah,
Though I'm sure the research is fascinating, but like versus droning out. Come on, who can compare, right?
exactly.
Getting blissed
Yeah.
out in a cabin to some drone stuff,
Yeah.
Before we get into the Match S project, I want to actually play for everyone on my screen the excerpt single, we should say, because we're going to talk about duration works, but this is an excerpt from side B of your upcoming release, SONESCENT, coming out on Drag City. Congrats! That's no small feat.
Yeah, thank you.
They're absolutely great, and it's funny because
Absolutely.
my good friend from college is works in the office and got them all the Drag City people hooked on Lamim Young, and that is how this came to be. They were like, who's someone who's got something awesome coming up that Lamim is gonna fuck with? And I'm like, yeah,
Cool.
yeah. I was like, yo, send me when they reached out, I was like, send me the leak first. I want to hear that. I want to hear the leaked record. I want to get that whole thing. We're not gonna leak it now. We're gonna play 5 minutes, and we'll talk a little bit both sonically and visually afterwards. But let's take five and take a look at Almost Gone, an excerpt from Almost Gone by Matches. And we can both turn off our mics for this too. label promo at the end. Got to get it in there. Wonderful. Everyone, give your clapping emojis if you can in the Zoom. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. And that was you had there were two videos that had come out because I had posted the excerpts from a different one yesterday, and I had noticed on YouTube that I guess there were two. Didn't realize that there were two at this time. That's awesome. Because this is something that I've had the pleasure of listening to the record a couple times now at this point. I guess three times through and through. But this video kind of works as a microcosm for the record, in my opinion. The sounds that you have, there are, drone music is linear, right? We're continuously moving forward, but it also, the way you arrange things is also kind of stylistically linear in that you bring in elements in your sound moving forward that could be entirely different instrumentation. It's not necessarily long tone synthesis. It's not necessarily string or live instrumentate like acoustic, traditional instruments. It's not necessarily tape music. There are elements of all these things, almost a kind of like American Appalachian sort of drone element to some of this too. I hear some of that in the string work on the record as well. This kind of, like the Dylan Carlson take on Americana, like the slowing it down to its glacial elements, but still very much like rooted in like pedal points. Could you tell us a little bit on, I guess, where you see yourself as far as these many influences that we're hearing? Like, where do you primarily take from in your sound?
Yeah, it's funny that you say Appalachian because I'm from Appalachia. I'm from Pennsylvania and like a rural,
Boom!
part of PA and the Allegheny.
Boom!
Yeah,
Hell
you nailed it
yeah!
with that one.
There you go. There you go. Well, I
Yeah.
have an affinity. I have an affinity. I mean, I'm a Yankee, but I'm a Boston, Massachusetts, born and raised,
Ah,
a city kid. But my affinity for the drone has taken me in like the directions where I'm like, oh shit, like yeah, like the fiddle, the even the Alan Lomax, like Black Appalachian tapes, you hear this, compare it to even like doom metal, and I'm like, oh my god, the similarities are so real, right?
yeah. Yeah,
So
but then
sorry,
also like
continue.
Lamont Young, right? So like, yeah,
Yeah.
your namesake.
Yeah.
I worked for, well, actually part of my research was like volunteering at the Dream House. And so I worked
Oh
there
wow.
for a summer and I got so immersed into like that kind of drone that's, arty and very New York kind of like drone music,
Yeah.
minimalist from the 60s with at that time a lot of prestige. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting combo I hadn't thought about.
Interesting. Well, I mean, if you look at Lamont too, like, wasn't he in like Nebraska, just like
Yeah.
listening to the wind and stuff as a child, or Oklahoma
Yeah.
or
And I think
something?
a power line or like
Yeah.
I forget what it
Generator
was. It was more,
hums.
yeah.
Hums. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's all rooted in plains and mountains and wind and nature to some regard. And
Mhm.
also, I mean, the record includes some field recordings too, right?
Mhm.
Some
Yeah.
elements of that. I mean, do you see with all of these, you know, if we're going all the way from like the folk influence of American, pedal point drone influence in that way, all the way to the academic or high art New York Tribeca world of things, do you feel like there's a primary artist along the way, or artists maybe besides Lamont and besides
Mhm.
your Appalachian upbringing, that really, like, for the Match S project, were like, because Chicago 2000s, like, this is like pedal drone capital of the world, right? Like, and
Mhm.
we have so much post rock before that coming out of there, and with thanks to record labels like Drag City, I guess. So, I mean, were there artists in the contemporary kind of maybe DIY or underground world that were doing things that really sparked your interest in this?
Yeah, I mean, I could go so many directions with that. My first thought was probably like Eliane Radigue. Around the time that I was making this, Eliane Radigue was someone who I think actually is somewhere in that space between like high art world and like maybe DIY culture or like folk traditions,
Mm.
because she's so at least I've never met her, but like her interviews seem so unpretentious, and she really has like a very simple and straightforward and really kind of like bald approach to composition, I think.
Mm.
Um, and it's kind of in the face of a lot of those people too. When people would like get up in a huff and leave her performances, or like when people performed her compositions because they were too simplistic, or I don't know why they left, but people would get angry because they thought that it wasn't like real composition. I think that speaks to the fact that she's between those two poles. If you can like put those on a line.
Absolutely. And the French being the French and their
Mhm.
music, concert music being very, very much sacrilege if you're going to take
Mhm.
things in different directions. There's just so many like, you know, get the, get some Europeans pissed off enough to be like violent about things. Concert music is one of them. Soccer
Yeah.
is another. Um, right? But like there's a tradition of this, right? And yeah, I
Mhm.
guess she's kind of the queen of this patience in music from
Mhm.
a even when she's doing modular or like early modular synthesis work compared to her acoustic concert music in the traditional sense, there is this, yeah, a need. It is very unpretentious, right? Because like what's more human than just like learning how to like breathe a little bit, and I get more of this from my like Pauline Oliveros sort of influence on my own
Mhm.
deep listening, but there's a very clear overlap whether they acknowledge each other or not in this sort of realm.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's very interesting to hear you use Elaine, because we talk about her a lot, or Eliane,
Mhm.
mentioning it in the folk sense as well, because I also see her as like working in this nice little farmhouse in the countryside, and in
Yeah.
juxtaposition of this like the giant modular rig in her cottage, but otherwise it is kind of this spacious, calm environment that she puts herself in. Do you feel like, having grown up in rural PA, I mean, Chicago's not that, but I mean, do you
Mhm.
feel like a connection with the physical space in relation to this sort of spacious music?
Yeah. Sometimes not. Sometimes I don't really feel that connection, but actually the thing that started this whole record, definitely, because I was in Joshua Tree when this
Ah,
happened, doing like a long silent meditation, like a 10-day, immersion in silence. And so that landscape and that space around was all I had to look at and listen to while I was there. And so absolutely, in the case of this record, I think that's space and sound connected
how do
big
you
time.
how did it feel deliberately, as a someone that works in sound, deliberately doing the maybe this isn't your first silent retreat, but that specific angle of it can be, I don't know. I was in New Mexico recently, and like the silence is it's kind of scary for me. Like it's more just like getting in tune with my tinnitus, if anything.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that the sound you hear at the beginning of the record is supposed to be like a representation of tinnitus. Basically, that high
Ah,
pitched scream is
yes.
like you're sitting down in a silent environment, ready to go into your inner space. And the first thing that's like roaring for me is tinnitus for sure. And then body sounds like breathing and a heartbeat, maybe like other body sounds are coming up.
Mm,
So yeah, that was my very first experience, is just like being so disoriented. I
right.
think I was so like coming from cities in general, but I was coming from LA before that. I was with a friend recording out there. So working in sound and also being in the city, and it's such a traffic
Mm,
oriented city too, that it was a shock when I first
yeah.
sat down.
It's I mean, it's that, the classic John Cage in the anechoic chamber type, I hear my blood, like type of vibes.
Yeah.
Not that extreme, but pretty extreme nonetheless, especially if now you remove the voice, like you're a silent it's a silent retreat, you're not talking to anybody, but also like the assumption is you're not going to like, I talk to myself all the time. You know what I mean? Like, trying to like actually like remain completely internalized in that way, as someone that studies sound both in the academic sociological sense as well as the musical sense, must be quite the contrast to your daily
Mhm.
life. But
Yeah.
maybe this is the type of music that do you feel like this is the in this type of sound, the requires a bit of that every once in a while from an artist trying to tap into this in the
Mhm.
you know, reflecting on spaciousness and silence through sound production.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I need it. Absolutely. When I'm in my house and like in my life, there's usually sound going on. I'm usually playing music or like listening to voices. And I have a practice space in Chicago that I love because I just like intentionally don't do that there except for the sound that I'm making. So it's like mostly time spent in silence when I'm like setting up and tearing down and I'm just like being in there. I
Right.
don't turn on music or usually don't, I don't like put on a podcast while I set up or something.
Yeah.
So it becomes that silent space just for a little bit.
Yeah, it's doing stretches before
Mhm.
you work your muscles, your ear muscles
Yeah.
in that way. Great. Well, this is fascinating stuff because you have a lot of notches in your belt for like the context of creating these different projects, and I'm assuming something new might come out of where you are now. Beyond the research work, beyond that,
Mhm.
when if you get a second to just have fun and make music, I don't know if you will.
Yeah, I mean, that's the plan. That's kind of like my secret reason for being here is to get some time away to work on, yeah, making new music.
Yeah, kill two birds, one stone. It's beautiful. So this record, it's two 18-minute tracks. If we were to look at it, full A side, B side, in that way. And I've talked to a lot of people on this pod about durational work versus like songs, in the presentation sense. And obviously, we have to have every label needs a single and marketable materials to some degree. And when we're dealing with durational works, it can often result in excerpting your works or excerpting durational pieces in general. But from your perspective, when the record is released, having them be these two long tracks, do you feel like that is a invitation or a challenge even for the listener to sit down? Because our world is very much talk about duration, like TikTok determines song length for the most part nowadays. Take it or leave it. They've made them 3 minute long options now, so hooray, we've gone up from a minute. But talk about a complete opposite end of the spectrum here for a still very, I don't consider this difficult music. It's still very palatable and consumable for someone that might not be interested in experimental drone. Uh, but I am. It could be way weirder, and I would totally take it. But this is. Do you feel like having these longer sort of durations is in some ways this a message to the listener?
Yeah, I think it could be taken that way, I guess. But I also, some people seem like a lot of artists and musicians I know resist becoming background music. They really want to be like front of consciousness for the person who's listening, whether that's deep listening or whether that's like entertainment, to be like fully captivating and catchy. And I fully embrace becoming background music and just letting the sound actually kind of absorb into your body if you're playing it, especially if you're playing it through speakers in space.
Right.
Headphones is a different experience, but if you're like projecting this in your whatever your home or office or wherever you're playing it, I'm into that, just letting like the waves wash over you while you're doing other things or while you're focused on other things, and let it kind of seep into your mind, your consciousness.
It works great for emails. The last time I listened to it
Yeah.
earlier today was fully through emails, but it's not. There is stagnant ambient music out there, like in the literal sense, the deliberate sense. Even like you could put harsh noise wall in that category too, is like
Mhm.
no change, like
Mhm.
wall, and people can take that even more as an invitation as like background. Like you get, it's to the point of white noise machine while you sleep almost. Your
Mhm.
music is not, I mean, you can put it on in the background. It works great for tuning out in the very literal, Brian Eno ambient definition of like invitation to be ignored. Like if
Mhm.
it's in your face, it's not ambient to that definition. But there are changes here and arrangements here that bring out very musical, non ambient elements in the traditional sense, including some of the folk here. But there's towards the end a sort of disintegration of. It's the first time at the very end of the record I felt like I heard staccato, like it was like some crumpling sounds and like some like voltage, different sounds like that. That was for the first time on the entire record. It wasn't a long attack. It was short, bursts of sound. To me, that was super engaging. The last 10 minutes of the last 5 minutes of the B side, I was like, whoa, like I'm suddenly like have to like really, really tune in here. You're for like I said, like in linear drone music, we have highs and lows in this record dynamically and stylistically. So it's interesting that you say to embrace the background, because although we could put it on in the background, my ear wants to be like, ooh, part two of side B. You know what I mean? Like we've entered a new realm, almost as if it's telling a story, you know?
Mhm.
Do you feel like, was there any sort of linear, maybe not literal narrative story, but like, do you feel like there were spaces we were being brought to in a way? Because we do travel, we travel on this record.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as kind of mimicking that 40 some minute, I forget how long it would be. No, like 36-minute
36.
meditation session, right? And
Ah,
so in the beginning, you're kind of just like trying to get in, trying to become immersed in your own inner world. And the songs keep coming and going, just kind of passing by. As soon as they're there, they're already gone almost.
huh. You do have
Yeah.
some very short sections. Like within these things, they do come and go. Like on the
Yeah,
end
just little.
the second video, the one that I posted on the promo yesterday, it ends in a almost like it felt like revival or like sacred harp singing, like some sort of melodic like vocal tape pieces coming in here that was like almost pulse. We had like a tempo compared to these long tones, especially in an intro like this. This is dealing
Mhm.
with arrhythmic sections. It's just I love the contrast.
I mean, that section in the end for me, so it's made with like no input electronics. So like tape
That's the
machines and
crackle.
mixers and stuff. Yeah. And that's why you get those cycles, those like really rhythmic parts. But for me, that was supposed to be kind of representing some of the like really psychedelic moments that I had while I was in Joshua Tree, just like sparks flying out of the top of my head and, almost to the point of like being overwhelming, overwhelming your body with like this kind of energy and,
Yeah,
so those are some of the sparks that you're hearing
that's
in the end, close to the
love
end.
it, love it, love it. And then that's even more so the story, right? Like I just said, like you're having the Joshua Tree experiences as the sort of grounding on this for this record in several regards, including like sensory experiences of being in the desert on hallucinogenics, or whatever.
Mhm.
Just I understand the electricity analogy to no input. That's perfect. As someone that has thought that I was becoming like Superman, like I could shoot lasers out of my hands at one point. At one point in a similar experience of my own, not in Joshua Tree though. That would make it that much more special. Um, Here's an interesting question related to all of this, related to duration, related to long tone and shifting between multiple sections in a single take or a single recording. What is the importance of patience for you in and out of music as far as to be able to sit? You are talking about meditation practice, so I'm assuming this is something that you're regimented in to some degree.
It's a practice. I think I'm a very, very impatient person. And people have told me that before. I think that I'm kind of like a, fast mover. My mom's real like jittery and she's like a bird kind of where she's just always moving a little bit. And I have a little bit of that. I also have a slower side too, I think. But so I don't think I'm naturally a very patient person, but this kind of practice is, there are rewards that come from, I guess, cultivating that kind of patience.
Right. So do you feel like the music side of this, your composition practice and recording practice through matches is the sonic equivalent of this, you know, forcing yourself to meditate until it becomes more natural, pushing yourself into these longer tone, you know, durational, slow tempo, glacial sort of environments to sonically slow your jitters down potentially.
Yeah, maybe. I mean,
Therapeutic.
with,
Music's therapy, right?
yeah, yeah. We're
I
also like really slow binaural beats in a lot of this too. So like apart from any like metaphor and meditation, there's at least that the slow beat is supposed to kind of like sync up with your brain waves and kind of, have a relaxing effect maybe.
so that's a very literal, when you're saying binaural beats, like you're actually finding the right ratio for that. Like that's very deliberate on your end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hell yeah. Hell
With the
yeah.
like brainwave entrainment method, I'm kind of agnostic about it, but I think it's cool to like try and it's cool to play with, seeing if it can actually have an effect if you play slow beats, versus like something to energize you as playing something faster.
Have you seen iDoser videos? Have you seen the iDoser world?
No,
Oh my God. This is,
not
well,
familiar.
this is, if you're a skeptic, I want to know your opinion on this. The binaural world, people supposedly have found the right frequency ratios in binaural beats to emulate X types of drugs or narcotic highs versus
Cool.
based on the duration, how long you listen to these binaural ratios. So you go on YouTube, you look up iDoser heroin, you will find plenty.
Wow.
And this is something that I do not have as an impatient person myself. Even as someone that likes binaural beating and long tone synthesis stuff, like you got to give me some art to this, not just get high. Like I'm not interested, But how do you, as someone that maybe has studied a bit more on these frequencies themselves, how do you feel about that? And now that I've told you that this world exists.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an opportunity to like raise questions for people. Like, is this real? Is this just like the priming effect, or that I expect to be feeling these kind of relationships? Or so I did this composition called Huizkol, Huizkol. There was a long tape. It's like a C90, I think, or yeah, it must be at least that because it's like 45 minutes on each side, I think. 47, I forget how long it is exactly, but it's long, right? And so it's like if you just like leave this playing, you should have some sort of arc, like energetic arc. Some people found it to be exactly the opposite. They were like, it felt like it was, chaotic and then became a dip in the middle or something, or vice versa. So yeah.
So this is I guess this is beauty is in the ear of the beholder. Patience can be a chore or a blissful sort of experience to put yourself through in the sonic sense. But
Yeah.
it's interesting. I'm right with you there on being an impatient person myself. I've been told, many people told me that I need to chill, and I am very much with your mom as a jittery bird. Uh,
Mm.
I don't help myself with the amount of coffee I drink every morning, but I personally am absolutely drawn to the long tones as a listener for therapeutic purposes and as a creator, composer, performer in this exact way of like, yeah, force yourself to slow down. When I saw Stars of the Lid in high school, I got them to sign a record afterwards and I was like, yeah, fucking Stars of the Lid, man. Like, fucking, yeah, bro, And they wrote Slow Down Max on the record, signed it.
Amazing.
And I took that to heart, and
Yeah.
it's like, maybe I should. Maybe I should. I still haven't, but, thanks, Adam and Brian of Stars of the Lid.
Love that.
Love it. Love it. Great record. Avec Laudanum, still one of my favorites. Anyways,
Mm. Yeah.
beautiful stuff. Uh, Talking about the record here, I wasn't going to bring up instrumentation until I saw on the video, or no, rather, was it the video or was it yeah, it was the video. I actually saw the lineup, the instrumentation here. We got a full chamber ensemble band, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call this. And on paper, looking at the instruments, you wouldn't think this is what sound would come out of 12 string, steel string, a flute, voice, bass, and clarinet. How important is collaboration with other folks of other instruments? How much of this is it being structured improv or composition in the real executive, I am Whitney, the boss, versus let's go in with an idea that we explore together? Because if you worked with Lamont, you know how extreme one can be about being the boss about something that has no structure whatsoever.
Yeah, I think maybe I was taking a cue from his executive role because this is the most executive I've ever been. So these are kind of, at least they're as much as I can remember of the songs that were coming in and out of my head in that 10-day meditation. So there were these like little orchestrations that would happen, and they were like just those tunes that you always have running through your head.
Yeah.
And so I tried to remember them, but I couldn't really transcribe them while I was there because there was like no pens, no paper, no language was the idea. So I just tried to remember them, but then after the fact, fully scored it out like meticulously. It took me so long to score it all out. Like I wrote the bass parts out. I wrote it except for the drums. I didn't fully score the drums because I'm not that good at it, but they were like,
we're talking
yeah,
standard notation.
totally. And then gave it to these musicians. And at the same time, I was like, so there were 2 overdub sessions with flute and clarinet, but there was the band was drums, guitar, and bass. And I told them that this was going to be so obscured and hidden that they didn't have to like put so much work into learning the parts, because like it's going to be buried so deep. And I don't know if they realized quite how deep, because I think especially like Tim was playing bass and he like fully learned it. He was like, I want to do it right. I want to fully get the part, which is wonderful because it sounds really good. And he like did it really perfectly. But yeah, it's so obscured that I kind of feel bad that he put all that work into it.
So is signal flow for your record in this case, starting with, idea at meditation retreat onto paper, given to musicians that have been told, learn it the way comfortably, but like don't sweat it. Some people sweat it, others don't. But then from there, are these now concrete objects in the studio that you have collaged in a way into a very musical collage, but a linear narrative of what granular stretching and processing to hide, like you said, the drums. Where the hell were the drums in this, right? Like what, like how do these musicians feel with the final product being that it's not so much that they were asked as like musicians, but rather as sources for raw materials?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was fully a submix. Like I just did the whole band recording, could be a record as it is. And I sang and did organ and like I added all of the strings and I did a lot of stuff too. Right. So it's like fully a record.
Yeah.
And then it was just taken down to like negative whatever dB in the mix. And then that's when I had the rest of the record happen. And so I like composed all of that with it sort of in mind, sort of in place, but I didn't like write to the recording. And then it was just like a mixing process of kind of blending them and having little pieces pop out barely and then disappear again.
Yeah. So this really,
that's like a second hidden record, an exercise in futility, I guess.
Oh my God. Yeah. Right. This is getting into, this is lore. This is real lore of the record, because if you played this for any, trained or well-versed ambient drone ear or aficionado or maker, things like that, and you ask them how do you think this was made? We can get some very clear instrumentation throughout, whether they're synthetic or acoustic, but one would guess like maybe, live, sort of like Lamont Young, like Theater of the Eternal Music, like long tone performance and then layered multi-tracked in that way. One would not have guessed that there at the root of all of this is a like rock band record.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, I mean,
like chamber rock, but
yeah, right. This is, what'd you say? What type of rock?
Like chamber rock of some kind, right? Because it's
rock,
like
yeah,
lots of acoustic instruments, but
yeah, fully composed chamber rock, chamber pop in that way. Oh man,
that part was really inspired by John Cale too, I think, because I feel like some of those songs are so, there's like orchestrations that are there, but it's kind of a rock band playing those pop records.
Right. right.
Yeah.
For Velvet Underground and also Theater Eternal Music. Yeah, that's fantastic. This is fascinating because on the one hand, it you couldn't have come up with exactly what you came up with without doing this process. But on the other hand, it seems very inefficient to do
Yeah.
this entire thing and then have it be becoming a submix studio project where the band has become paint that you are now applying to a canvas in a different way,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. And I wonder if there's another like visual art metaphor for this, because it's like there was a painting that then was turned into a print basically and shrunk down. I don't know, even I think I'm stretching the metaphor too far, but
Yeah.
it became a single track in my ultimate mix in the end because it was like fully submixed.
Huh.
And then it was just a part that was like one of many elements. There was also like a massive project, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's fascinating.
I'll never do it again. That's for sure. It took
Good
forever.
to know. Good
In the
to
beginning,
know.
I was just like, I really want to have like, music that's kind of coming and going distantly in the back of your head. So why don't I write the music? Why don't I record it? And why don't I hire people to like play in this band and whatever? And it seemed cool in concept, but then executing it was kind of insane at some points too.
The academic in you is to be like
Yeah.
conceptual, like from the root, and be like, God damn it, this is so much work. It
Yeah.
sounds very surreal in concept, though, to be like, I got all these pop songs stuck in my head, like
Yeah.
they came to me in a dream. They came to me in a meditative, like, like out of body experience state. And like they're just little sketches, ideas that I had to then, way after the fact, document on paper, but knowing that they were not exactly how you initially imagined it, and ultimately they're going to end up not how they were initially documented and recorded. It's very much it's this requires you should I don't know how much written material on your end describing the process is going to be released in the record in the EPK or whatever they call it. Whoever
Mhm.
interviews you next should ask you these questions so the world can know about this exact process because it really is fascinating. And if you're gonna do a record for Drag City, I mean, like this is the type that's now's the time to like
Mhm.
go all out on the concept, right?
Yeah, but this I did before I'd even kind of like talked to them
Oh
about
wow,
doing a record. So I just like made it, and it was done. And then I was like, here's this weird record. What do you think? And then that started that chapter.
conversation right there. Well,
It took
hey,
a long time.
you
Yeah.
followed your gut and it paid off. And let that be a lesson to all of us. Do get weird because it can pay off absolutely in just the fact that they're going to be. First of all, it sounds great, but then you tell them how you do it, and it's like, how long did this take you? How long did this take you? You would say from like, let's say notation to uh, final mastering.
Uh, so I think I went to Joshua Tree in 2017 in August and started writing soon after that. But it was like kind of slowly writing. I didn't record until I think 2019, if I remember right. And then was like, wait, no, I think I recorded in 2018. Yeah, it's all a blur now, but that was just like the songs, and then recording at the same time, kind of concurrently, some of my own stuff, but then mastering, I think was last year, early last year. And then, yeah,
Patience.
pressing it to vinyl took a long time. So,
It's patience in the entire, like, talking, walking the walk, talking the talk. We're making patient
yeah,
music, and it's going to be a patient process to create patient music.
yeah,
Fantastic. We were just talking a second ago about visual, like imagery and like visual inspiration, and we had this, this video here that is camcorder footage of yours. I'm assuming in Joshua
yeah,
Tree.
yeah.
So, I mean, we were already talking about space, literal space, but beyond that, color, light, and image, is this something that not just with this record, but in your practice in general, that's pretty conscious when making sound? Even going back to your band stuff, making punk rock, or whatever.
Mhm.
Is there a visual element consciously?
Yeah, I mean, not as much images, I would say, but more like shades of light and dark.
Mm,
And yeah, I don't have a very broad color palette either, so it's not very colorful. It's a lot of just kind of shades of gray, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah, but am not a very, I don't see a lot of images while I'm composing or recording or anything or playing. I usually don't have those clear images, except for when they're kind of more like narrative. So sometimes
Right.
I'll have like a scene that I kind of, that's more linguistic, I guess, or more of a story,
Hmm.
but less of just like a static snapshot.
Right. Right. But
Yeah.
one could take this video as narrative to some degree because you're giving us, maybe we don't know it's Joshua Tree, but we're in the desert, you know. We're hearing like long tone music that ultimately ends, it starts low and ends bright, you know. I feel like we end with that like clarinet, like the reeds kind of come out through the end. It's like almost like we've emerged from the quicksand or something like that in the
Yeah.
desert. I don't know. But do you feel like it's important to give a your listener something to look at to evoke the space that you were thinking about? Like, do you want to bring us to Joshua Tree with your record as well as with the visual materials that supplement it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like live, I love when there's some sort of when there are shades happening, there are color changes, even if they're slow. When I did that performance for the We School project with Lampo, I had just high frequency to low frequency. I'm sorry, vice versa, low frequency to high frequency to low frequency light. So it was just like red to purple, indigo, back to red again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I got that right. But I think that kind of thing, when it's really slow changes and it maps onto the music, can be really cool.
Right.
And yeah, if you're kind of dreaming and idealizing some sort of like desert, an ideal of a desert in your mind, that seems really rewarding for this kind
Right.
of record.
Right. Would you include that in, is there any sort of literal indication of that in text on the release itself from you? Like, is there an invitation to go to is there a Joshua Tree name drop in there?
I don't know if that's in like the liner. I don't think it's in the liner notes. Well, I guess just the name of the center where I was. I think I like thanked them.
I got
So
you.
that's in there. But
Cool.
also the cover artwork is amazing. Did you get to check out the cover artwork for the
No, I
record?
hadn't seen it yet. I was just looking on the
Okay.
the
So Ike
video.
Floor is an incredible ceramicist working in
Oh,
glazed
this is
ceramics.
yes, yes.
This
Oh,
piece, you can't, it's obviously it's 12 inches round, but it's huge. It's a
yeah.
huge crocheted ceramic piece that's
Yes. Right?
crocheted and then
Wow.
glazed and fired. Yeah, they are absolutely like jaw-dropping, talented
Oh,
artists.
dude.
Yeah.
Incredible. I also just love the stark contrast between like, is it wait, how large it is and how real is the like black background, you know, just like having that
Yeah.
complete contrast in there. It's also, quite the contrast between the video we just watched too, of like isolated versus literal space or ambient
Mhm.
space, under case, like environmental sound, ambient space, versus something that's isolated in that way, versus the
Yeah.
other video. The other video that we posted was more indoor, like animated, seemingly like kind of like seems almost related aesthetically to the album art with that other video, right?
Yeah, still floating in that black field.
Hmm.
Yeah, but there's motion happening, but
Right.
yeah, set apart, high contrast.
Yeah.
So the title senescent is kind of like senescent, like the, aging or elderly years of your life, the end of life. And the phrase that kept coming to mind with this was that it's like the last minutes in the life of music. And music is like those songs are kind of, that's like, it's dying. It's the very end of music. And so
Wow.
I think the artists were just like, I didn't even talk to them that much about it. I think with Ike more than with Jody, but I thought that was cool because like the ceramic looks very elderly to me. There's something about it that's like ancient.
Huh.
And then also the flowers, the dead flowers. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
and
was
melting the
such a
smell
surprise.
of the clay or whatever it was in the video itself that was, melting and stuff, just
Yeah.
disintegrating, right? It's wonderful. It's really wonderful stuff. Um, what was I gonna ask here, just related to that? Um, well, no, you answered it. I was just saying, like, as far as Joshua Tree and visual space goes, like in ambient noise and like lowercase ambient noise versus uppercase ambient and noise music, how we can evoke literal space, how important that is to evoke literal space versus allowing it to be more up into interpretation. You have a video here, and I guess we have that contrast between the two videos of, empty black screen with objects and occurrences happening there versus we're only outdoors. It's very clearly in a large open space. I feel like there are moments on the records where we are dry. Like the beginning of this track was kind of like the empty black space, or the beginning of the record coming from nothing with the tinnitus ringing. It feels like much of the record starts in this neutral environment and grows into a very literal, large, expansive world, and then brings it back in. Is that intentional on a visual level? Are we trying to evoke ideas in that way? I'm sorry, I keep asking. Did you do
No,
it on purpose?
I mean, this is so corny, but it's like outer and inner space, right? Like outer space is like the silent desert. And I was just thinking you're going into this like rich and chaotic inner space with lots of dissonance and moments of consonance, and kind of that's where the real chaos is. But then when you go back out, when you zoom back out, it's actually pretty, silent. It's the desert again.
Right.
And I think the space would have been different if I was imagining a different place, or if it had been conceived somewhere else. Because the desert has a type of silence that, like, where I grew up in the mountains is like so noisy,
Yeah,
even in
yeah,
the winter it's pretty noisy. It's just, yeah, tons of critters and wind and all kinds of stuff.
right. When you have trees, when you have tree lining, that's really what it is, right?
Yeah.
Scytherism, right? The wind
Yeah.
in the trees. I love that fucking word. Um,
Mhm.
one last question before we open up to a little Q&A here. And this is a big one that I've always wanted to just ask fellow drone and ambient and noise aficionados, practitioners. Is this type of music meant to have an emotional quality to it? People tell me that chill is not an emotion. I could say, being relaxed is a state of mind, but being in a meditative state is kind of the opposite of emotion in some ways. But then there are other people that listen to works by Stars the Lid or Basinski or even Radig, going to more classical worlds, and they feel, there might be a melancholy to some of this, or maybe not necessarily like the dark ambient, like darkness in that way, but a sort of maybe tiredness that can be interpreted not necessarily as happy. I don't know. Do you feel like there's an emotion attached to your work or to this umbrella of sound that we sort of find ourselves in? It's all, like I said, up to interpretation, but how do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, this record specifically, I feel like is just clearing out space and exposing what's going on inside yourself more than providing like a context for it, or, a vibe or like an emotion. At least that's been my experience of it. This is also just like from making it so emotional. When I was mixing it, it was just like waves and waves of emotion as I was mixing it, but it wasn't like happy or chill. It was actually disturbing and was, like overwhelming, emotionally overwhelming. And so I think that's like a funny thing, is some people take it in the direction of like meditative means happy. And I haven't had that experience with meditation.
Right.
It's a balance, but sometimes it's a balance of extremes. And sometimes the extremes can be far out on the poles of whatever emotional spectrum you're looking
Right.
at.
So again, it's like it's more a reflection of what is happening with you in the moment when not only making this but also listening to it, right?
Mhm.
Because if you're trying to be actively like in a meditative space, in a formal practice in that way, it is oftentimes about like if there's any mental baggage going on, you have to face it and then like clear it out, right? Like you said, it's like find a way to become one with nothing. But that's really vulnerable for people. It's I can't. My mom's a therapist in mindfulness, and I call her a Judist because she's a Jewish Buddhist, and she meditates often But like I talked to her about it. It's like, yeah, music is my meditation, but I'm still thinking. Like I'm still like very present. I have a hard time removing that because maybe I don't want to get vulnerable like that. I don't know. Kudos to you for using your music as a vehicle to do that, just as you do with your meditation practice. Because shit's hard. It's very difficult.
Yeah, and maybe this is like more of something I would like to talk with your mom about, but I feel like if you aren't feeling your feels, they don't go away. They turn into other stuff, you know? So yeah, you got to give yourself space to feel your feels.
Yep. Well, takes time. Takes time.
Yeah.
Takes patience in that way. Do you have any advice for, I guess, aspiring folks of all ages trying to work in this particular field of sonic arts? Long tone, drone, ambience, but also maybe music for meditation in general.
Yeah, advice is really hard. I never know what to say for advice. My life has been so weird and I still feel like I still feel like a baby all the time. Anything that happens, I'm like, I feel like a baby.
Maybe that's
So
a good thing.
yeah,
Maybe you should just try to approach life like a baby.
yeah. Approach life like a baby.
Yeah, that's
Yeah, just do your stuff.
that's the blurb. That's the
Yeah.
blurb that we're putting on for the promo for this. Well, with that, I would like to open up our Q&A to those that are interested in potentially unmuting themselves or asking in the chat. Peter has their hand raised. Yes, please use your raising hand feature. Peter, welcome, welcome, welcome. Peter is one of our regulars every week. Peter's a regular. They're my unofficial TA.
Oh God.
They've covered for me when I'm not able to do these things. Peter, what's up? Talk to us.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Whitney, about uh, if you actually have no opinion on this, that's fine. But I wanted to ask you if you have any ideas or opinions or related to your own music and where your work is situated about the idea of music being American. Because when I think
Mm,
about Drag City represents this full spectrum of like music that registers as American to me, right? Like you have this sort of like folk type stuff, you have this very witty, very literate type stuff, and you have drone music like yours and quote unquote freak folk. And I was also thinking as I was listening to your talk, all of the almost everyone except Elian Radigue that you guys have batted back and forth as influences for your record are Americans. And it feels like there is this, there's that carcinization theory that all of natural selection trends toward crab. It feels, to a certain extent, it feels like all of at least American experimental music or American music in general, like drone seems to emerge from so many places in American music. And we were talking, you guys were talking about that, right? Like it emerges from folk, it emerges from Appalachia, but also hyper urbane New York scenes, and you know Miles Davis even, and jazz and rock, and drone just seems to have this American quality to me, and I don't necessarily know why, but I'm wondering if that's something that you have thought about or if you have any kind of opinion on.
Great question.
yeah, that's such a good question. I've kind of thought of that being over here and talking about my music with people not in the United States, like where is it coming from? What is it about? And those are all the American influences that I'm thinking about for sure. America's really young. And so I feel like it's possible to have, in the same way that it's a melting pot of a lot of things, or, an assimilation machine, if you have a more negative approach, that's something that can happen, I think, musically and aesthetically too. And I came up in like noise and DIY scenes and music. And so there's just everything. And I feel like something droning is just kind of like the name of the game. That's like where it all starts. There's something droning, there's something already in the process. And then something else happens usually.
I feel like you could, whenever I think about this, like you'd say something very cliche and shallow about how like America is like this country of wide open spaces or something like that. But to me, I wonder about this idea of what you were saying about America being young, drone feels like this very something that comes from a young nation that's accustomed to modernism, right? There's a existential quality to drone that kind of reflects that, like, America is this country that, you know, whatever the Enlightenment means, it happened then, and, you know, we're kind of this bastion of modernism, which is again reflected by so many of the artists on Drag City in various ways. But it feels like there's a a sense of in the clip of yours that you're played and in what you're talking about with meditation, it feels like there's this sense of what's the term, like self-awareness, right, in a way that like humans kind of haven't had for a lot of our history, that feels reflected in American music and maybe reflected in drone as we think about it today, as opposed to maybe in previous times.
Yeah.
It's wonderful, wonderful analysis there, Peter. Appreciate that. For those that don't know,
And thank you, Whitney.
I was going to say, I think that the drone beyond America is the glue for a lot of us, as far as like the root of different musics. I mean, I have a whole talk on this Patreon about, like, you know, India, North Africa, parts of, you know, the Balkans, and different parts of, like, you know, Eastern European Orthodox church music. We have this, you know, it's like, talk about like doom metal, like Russian basso profundo choral music is doom metal 100%, you know, and it's still that drone at the root, at that pedal point, you know. Maybe it's something human about sustain. I don't know. But thank you, Peter, for the particular America question about that, because it's something specific in that melting pot, like you said, of the it's new, right? It is very new. It's very young.
We're the only country that could make freak folk, and I don't necessarily think Whitney's record is freak folk, but it feels adjacent to it, and it's a thing that occurs to me a lot of the time when I think about stuff.
Now I want to hear this record with Bonnie Prince Billy singing on top of it. You know, continue the cycle.
Listen, you say Drag City, and my like eternal idolization of Joanna Newsom like cannot help but from like spring forth from within me.
Forgot about that. Talk about chamber pop. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah. Anyone else want to raise? Peter, you can turn the camera off. Will, turn your gear on. Oh my God. Yes. Yes. We have Whitney. You're here. You're very lucky. You're here to witness. This is Lieutenant Putrid McGrib. He is official security for the Lamim Young Patreon community. Drone and field recording provocateur. Will, how are you in Virginia? Speaking of Appalachia. Speaking of Appalachia.
I'm doing good. I did have a.
This is the guy from the flyer, by the way.
All right.
Yeah, that was me. So you were talking about patience, and coming from this question is coming from me, and because I have a very short attention span. Thank the ADHD for that. And other things, anxiety. You know, I'm not going to go into that, but having a short attention span, sometimes it's really hard for me to focus on stuff. And I'm just wondering, how do you keep it interesting for yourself when you're working on like a long form piece? And so you keep being engaged with it instead of having your mind drift off to like something else.
How do we not look at our phone, you know?
Exactly. Like, how do you not look at your phone? Like, you know, like, because I'm wondering for me, and also anyone else who might have that problem. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think not so much with this one, but with other really long form pieces, I fall asleep a lot when I'm mixing because I really want to get a sense of like the whole piece, and I just can't stay awake sometimes for it. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. You know, maybe it's just that boring of music. I don't know.
Maybe that relaxing.
I saw Phil Niblock at Intermedia Arts downtown New York fall asleep during his own set at his own birthday party show. So that's
And classically, he plays solitaire while he performs. So he like is performing and it's so long and slow that he's playing solitaire very visibly for the audience to like be in on the joke.
yes,
Yeah.
literally answering emails. So
Yeah.
embrace the potential drifting away, potentially like fall into it entirely.
Yeah. And then there's just the repetition of the writing and mixing process itself. So like so many times that I'll notice things and I'm like, how long has that been there? You know, like I just heard this on time number, whatever, 75, listening through what I think is a final mix. And then I'm like, oh, back to check that out, you know?
That makes sense. Yeah. I just, I know I was thinking about that today because I did some field recordings of snow melting under on a piece of sheet metal, and
Cool.
it's like an hour and something. I just left it sitting out. I just left the waterproof contact mic under it outside and hung out in the house. But I'm
Yeah.
like mixing it. I'm like, okay, how do I mix this? Because I don't know if I can sit still for an hour. I
Yeah.
can't even watch a movie. Like I can't even watch Contact, even though that's a 2.5 hour movie.
Can't even.
Yeah.
You would be the one. You would be the one to storm out of a Eliane Radigue concert, Will.
No, no. See, that's different. That's different.
That's special. That's special. You paid to be there. Come on.
Yes, yes. That's also a totally different scenario. Like I'm gonna be paying attention.
Yeah, someone else's work. But yeah, I mean, the challenge is right. Like when I mean, I'm the same way. I'm super ADHD, and maybe it's a matter for me. I do have to like put the phone away. Like that specifically that I mentioned the phone because like yeah, I'm glued to it, baby. And sometimes my brain will drift, but I like the idea, like you said, Whitney, of drifting towards like the actual like steadiness, like go in the Phil Nimlock direction rather than I will,
Yeah.
rather than you know, I don't know, find new stimuli.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah. That answers what I was curious about because I just, I know I have trouble with it, and I don't, just how different people deal with their things.
I mean, my other thought is that like I know everyone's relationship with weed is different, but that can really change your attention. So I
Yeah,
don't know if
well,
that takes you toward attention or away from it, but sometimes that does it for me.
I don't even know anymore what
It
it does
certainly
for me.
takes the edge
It's
off.
normal for me. It brings me to normal now.
Yeah, it
Man.
makes me normal. It makes me like able to sort of function, even though I'm still scared of going to Home Depot. But
We should all just be listening to Sublime, guys. That's what we need to do. Just listen to some Sublime, baby. Some ska, some third wave ska. Thank you, Will. Other questions? Anybody else raise their hand using the hand emoji thing? If not, then we can end it right here. I guess it's looking like that's it. All right. Well, in that case, I just want to leave us all with another screen share of matches.bandcamp.com, where, as we can all see, you can conveniently pre-order the record, which will come out in just over a month. But please support Matches, support Whitney Johnson as she continues her winter abroad in the snow, but not too cold, but wilderness for sure.
Wilderness for sure.
Wilderness for sure. Thank you so much, Whitney, for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's such a treat to be able to talk about this at
Yeah.
length. This is wonderful.
Yeah, seriously, I know this. I'm really happy that we're able to. I'm really happy that I wrote these questions down because these were exactly the tangents that I wanted us to go on. This is the types of deep talks that are worth having. Thank you so much, and thank you all for tuning in. And see you all later on. Bye,
Yeah, thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
See ya.